Are we going to put up the intro? Okay. He gave me a pretty good intro, pretty much told you almost everything I was going to say, but I guess I'll fill in the blanks. So I named my presentation today, The Power of Press is Not Dead Yet, because what happened in my scenario is I was recognized by a journalist from the New York Times. Well, to begin that, my story was in the spring of 2020, when the pandemic was ramping up, I was getting ready to have my first annual production sale. I partnered with another outfit I was managing, and it was set for March 15th. Well, Friday, March 13th of 2020, the feeder calf market tanked to 108. And I talked to my partner at the time, and I was like, I don't know what we're going to do. We should probably reschedule. And we went ahead with the sale. Pretty much the sale tanked, and I took a lot of my animals back home, had to sell them private treaty off the farm like I was doing before. I've been in the purebred Angus business for 15 years before we even had this first annual production sale. Building good genetics, spending money on embryo transfer, IVF, everything. And had elite animals, over $300 C females and stuff, and gave them away for $950. So at that time, I was kind of in a low place, and just the family history. I am a fourth generation farmer. Seeing my family there, my dad, it's on the bottom right. The top right picture, that's my dad and my uncle and my grandparents. My grandparents actually had a dairy, and they would go to the local town and markets on the weekends. And they would trade eggs, they'd sell their milk. And, that's how my dad was raised, getting up every day at 6 a.m., milking the cows, riding the horse to school, come home, milk the cows again, go to bed, repeat process. He was probably the hardest working person that I'd ever met in my life. Unfortunately, I lost my father in October of 2011 unexpectedly. And, he was a great man. I always said if I could ever end up just becoming half the man that my father was, I will have become someone. That's how much of a great person I thought he was. But I still live at my original location where I was born and raised. I live in my family childhood home that my dad bought, 280 acres in 1965 for $20,000. A house and 280 acres. Today, you think about that, 280 acres and $20,000. Well, $20,000 doesn't get you very far. So, my story begins after the sale crashed and burned. I was pissed. It was just the market's tanked. The store shelves were empty, beef prices were high, and we're getting screwed as cattle farmers with the feeders at 108. The store shelves are empty, our prices should be going up. Well, that didn't happen. So I went to Facebook and I started ranting, and every group I could. I was like, if something doesn't change, the future of the beef industry in this country is doomed. And it caught the attention of New York Times global economic correspondent Peter Goodman. He messaged me privately on Facebook and said, I'd read a lot of your comments, and he's like, I'm coming to your area to interview the shipping company that was shipping the vehicles for Ford Motor on their supply chain issues at the time. And this was in, he came October or November of 2021. And he released the article in December 27th of 2021. And I told Peter, he asked me the $1 million question: why are beef prices so high in the store and farmers are going broke? I said, I'll give you 4 reasons: Cargill, JBS, National Beef, and who am I missing? Oh, Tyson. Tyson? Yeah, Marfrig is National. But yeah, and I told him, I'm like, you're feeding America and you're going broke doing it. This is crap. We're out here, we own the land and we're not getting paid accordingly. As Frank Enders has his presentation, I've talked to Frank a lot on No Rancher Left Behind. The parity in the markets of everything. A new pickup's $80,000 nowadays. And feeder calves are still bringing, 1,200 to 1,500. They were bringing that 15, 20 years ago. So I told Peter, I'd opened up to him and I said, we went to my local vet office. I showed him around my entire community. I took him to our local USDA processing facility. He saw everything from start to finish. He saw my cattle, took him to the local USDA facility. I also took him to a local feedlot that we still have. I don't know how they're still in business, but they deal directly with the big four. And he talked to the same guy there, the head man at the whole feed yard, and basically gave the whole spiel, but he didn't want to say too much because he didn't want to bite off the hand that feeds him. So at the end of our interview, Peter and I were at our vet office, and I told him, I got really low in 2020 after that sale crashed and burned, and I almost took my life. I had a gun to my head, and I see my wife pull back in the driveway. So I hurried up, put the gun away. I didn't take my life. And I can thank my wife for saving my life. And for no reason that day, she just came back home. God must have told me that I had something else to do. So here I am. And, I told Peter that. So he went and wrote that article, told my story, and he caught the attention of Congressman David Scott, at the time was the U.S. House Ag Committee chairman. And I was feeding silage one night, kept getting this call from D.C., and I was like, yeah, that's probably the IRS, I'm not answering that. Kept calling me, and finally one night at like 6:30 Central Time, I was like, that's 7:30 their time, the IRS ain't open at 7:30. So I answered it, and this gentleman says, this is Daniel Feingold with the United States House Ag Committee. And I was like, okay, really, who is this? He's like, no, sir, this is Daniel Feingold, the United States House Ag Committee. He's like, Chairman Scott saw your article in the New York Times. We'd like you to come testify. And I was like, against what, for why? And he's like, well, as you can see here, it was an examination of price discrepancies, transparency, alleged unfair cattle, markets. Well, I was like, all right, so what's the catch? And he's like, nothing, we'll fly you out. You can testify and we'll fly you home. It's like, wow, yeah, sign me up. I'll go to bat, I don't care. I mean, I'm drowning in debt at that point, and I was like, something's gotta change. So they flew me out, I testified. I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys my testimony. It's about 4.5 minutes, for those of you who haven't seen it.
But the truth. Thank you. Mr. Young, thank you for coming. And now I would like for you to be our first witness. And please begin your testimony when you are ready.
I ask, why are we not enforcing the Packers and Stockyards Act? Is everyone watching on the payroll?
Swear.
All right, just leave it there. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I really appreciate you selecting me to be here today. My name is Coy Young. I'm a 4th-generation cattle farmer from the rolling hills of northern Missouri. I come here before you today and try to save what is left of rural America, because rural America is under attack by the greed and corruption of the big four that are in question here today. For years, the packing industry has been concentrating more and more with fewer, larger mega plants to process our proteins. The American cattle farmers and ranchers are tired of being taken advantage of and losing money year after year while watching the big four post record profits every single quarter. The Packers have manipulated the system with their alternative marketing agreements or arrangements, which was forming on captive supply, with the huge corporate-owned feed yards that control 87% of the fed beef in this country. AMAs have killed the cash market, and competition within the beef industry, making the markets the cow-calf producers have to compete in so depressed for the times. Bankruptcy rates continue to be on the rise, and we're at a 10-year high in 2019. The Packers and Stockyards Act of 1921 was put in place to protect the cattle farmers and ranchers from the very thing that's happening within the beef industry today. I ask, why are we not enforcing the Packers and Stockyards Act? Is everyone in Washington on the payroll of the Big Four to let them continue their free reign without consequence? AMAs are legalized market manipulation practices that should not be allowed and enforced under the Packers and Stockyards Act of 1921. There's an alarming number. The number is 40.27 cattle farms that call it quits every single day in this country for the past 3 decades because they can no longer make ends meet. Alone, that should grab the attention of leaders in Washington that there is a problem going on here. Family legacies and century farms are being ripped out of their hands, and families are losing their loved ones from an unprecedented amount of suicides. Farming and ranching has the most suicides in any industry due to stress, a shrinking bottom line, and that's fueled by the greed and capitalistic nature that's everyday business in the Big Four that are in question here today. There's blood on the hands of the Packers and leaders in Washington, and no one seems to care. No one seems to want to do anything about it. I know we live in a country where capitalism reigns supreme, and it's every man for himself, but Packers take capitalism to a whole new level. We as cattle farmers and ranchers just want an even playing field and be able to raise our families and live a decent life our fathers and grandfathers did before us. Nowadays in rural America, everyone in the farming community has 1, 2, or even 3 extra jobs outside of the farm to help pay their bills and make ends meet. The cows no longer pay for themselves and haven't for a very long time now. I never thought I would see the day when feeding America will become a part-time job. It's wrong and it's not fair. There's enough money to go around in the beef industry. It's the distribution of profits that are proportionally unbalanced that is the problem. I know I sound like a broken record, but it's from the manipulation of the Big Four packers that control 85% of the beef packing industry, but they also control 87% of all the fed cattle that are slaughtered. Mandatory country order of labeling, also known as MCOOL, was repealed in December of 2015, which was just another slap in the face of the American cattle farmers and ranchers, which now cannot differentiate their superior product from cheap foreign beef that now floods 20% of the market in this country. The public and consumers no longer have the option to choose between our superior American-raised beef or foreign beef. Restoring MCOOL would help restore some competition to the marketplace so the consumer would be able to choose their product every time they go to the grocery store, and the consumer would drive the demand for American-raised beef. Imagine waking up every single day and knowing that the cattle that you've birthed, fed, and raised are not going to make you any money because there isn't enough room in the rig system for the small cattle farmer to make a buck. The share of the retail dollar, the complete disconnect from the farmer to the grocer, is what's bankrupting the farmers and ranchers, with only receiving 37% of the retail dollar as the farmer compared to 60% 30 years ago. Now paying 200% increases in equipment costs and overall inputs, it's a complete recipe for disaster and a losing proposition to raise cattle in this country anymore. My dad always said you could sell your calves in 1975 and go to the Chevy dealership and buy a new pickup. That still holds true today. You can go sell your calves and you can still go buy a 1975 Chevy pickup. The market share that was once the cattle farmers has since been redistributed to the middlemen, the packers, and the grocers. Make all the money, and we pay all the inputs and go broke raising the very product they profit so handsomely from. What's America going to do when there aren't any American family farms left to produce the most flavorful, juicy steak in the world? Thank you. I got home from that. I felt compelled to do more. And that's where the birth of No Rancher Left Behind came from. I called Bill and I said, Bill, there's AA, there's all these support programs for all these different things, but there's nothing out there for farmers. And I'm like, 1% of the population that feeds the world has the highest suicide rate of any profession. That's sad. So I was like, I'll head it up. We'll meet every Wednesday night. And, more two heads are better than one. You can come every Wednesday night to vent, talk. We can put our heads together, create solutions for your farm, something you're doing, anything. We're just there to listen. And I'm always there to listen because I'm the one that heads it up. So if you guys want to talk, just get on. I met this outfit, More Perfect Union did a video on Cargill, and they used my testimony as the intro where it says, I know we live in a country where capitalism reigns supreme, but the Packers take capitalism to a whole new level. And I was like, wow, that's cool. They used that for their intro to this video on Cargill, how they own everything in your home, your food, everything. And I contacted Chai Dengari, and he formerly worked for the New York Times and Huffington Post. And More Perfect Union is a small media-based outlet on YouTube. They have real-world stories on real-world people that fake news won't publish or let out. So I called them, I'm like, will you listen to my story? So they sent out a videographer, and I told my story, and we put together a video that they released in January of this year. And it was narrated by Bo the Fifth. I don't know if anybody knows him. He's an online narrator or advocate. And it was called Big Beef is Killing Rural America. And I'd like to play that video for you now, guys, so you can see it. Breathing down your neck, they want their money. And, it just, the bank kept calling me every single day, hounding me. I was just at a breaking point because I was just so upside down and I didn't see any other way out. And, I was gonna take my life, and my wife forgot something that day and came home. So I hurried around and put the gun away, and she walked in and she said, what's wrong? What are you doing? I'm like, nothing. And I changed my mind. She saved my life.
Coy Young was on the brink in 2020. He's a fourth-generation cattle rancher, and because of corruption and consolidation in the beef industry, he's about to be the last. He's selling off his entire herd and getting out of the business. And he's not the only one being affected. You, sitting at home, watching this video, are getting ripped off by the same people that are forcing Coy to shutter his farm.
The price of beef is up 20% from this time last year.
While beef prices in your local supermarket continue to skyrocket, and America's farmers suffer under increased costs, decreased sales, and rising suicide rates, well, the big four beef monopolies are raking in record profits. The CEO of National Beef, Tim Klein, claimed that high prices on the shelves, well, that's simply the result of supply and demand.
The beef industry is the most purest form of capitalism in this country, I believe. As demand goes up, price goes up. If demand goes down, price goes down.
But those profits aren't going to the farmers.
We're at a breaking point. Either something has to change or there isn't going to be any American ranchers left.
It's Bo, and this is the classroom for More Perfect Union. And today, we're going to talk about how the beef industry got rigged. Coy is one of 14,700 cattle farmers who will have to sell their farms or go bankrupt this year. Since the 1980s, the United States has lost more than 44% of family farms, and with them, the main streets and rural communities that they held together. Coy's story is like a lot of other ranchers, and he's leaving his business in debt. 100% of his check today, well, it's going to the bank.
The bank must have called and said they needed the check because their name's on it too, which basically they own you until you pay your debt.
Coy sold the last of his herd right after the new year. We talked to him at Christmas time about how his family was getting by.
When you're part of this life and you do it, the animals, you love them. I'd been hanging on to these guys for my cows for the past 3 years thinking it'd get better. It hasn't. You're losing your self-image. As a man, I'm trying to get over it, but it's like, the world doesn't have a use for you anymore. You need to do something else is basically what I'm being told. The small guys don't have a chance.
You might not know how cattle ranching works, so let's break down the whole process for you from the farm to your local supermarket. First, there are the ranchers. Coy is a calf cow producer. He raises cattle until they reach a certain weight.
You basically raise the animals from birth until they're an average of 7, 10 months, 12 months of age roughly. It's more by weight, so once they get up to 500, 600 pounds, we sell them at the local livestock market.
Ranchers like Coy sell at auction, which is supposed to be an open market with price discovery, meaning ranchers bid based on what they expect the market to look like at any given time. They look at things like the weather, the price of grain, and international sales. The cattle go on to a second rancher, known as a backgrounder, then on to the feedlot, where they are fattened until they're slaughtered. The slaughterhouses buy from the feedlots and package the meat, where it goes to you, the consumer.
Your primal ribs, your strip loins, your sirloin roast, hamburger.
But in the last few decades, the number of feedlots has decreased, and the packers, the ones who slaughter the cattle, have consolidated. This has had all kinds of consequences for consumers and farmers. For one, as consolidation increased, competitors dropped out, and ranchers had fewer buyers to sell to. What they were able to take home went down, way down.
My dad always used to say you could sell your calves in 1975 and buy a new Chevy pickup. Well, that still holds true today. You can sell your calves and buy a 1975 Chevy pickup.
Just look at this chart. The consumer has steadily been paying more for beef, while the farmer is earning less. Ranchers only get 39 cents of every dollar spent on burgers and steaks, whereas in 1970, they were getting 60 cents of every dollar.
What we've got is extreme monopoly power.
Peter is an economics reporter at the New York Times. He met Coy when he was working on a story not about American cattle ranchers, but about supply chain breakdowns in general.
He came up here and he was like, why are beef prices so high in the store and you guys are going broke? And I told him, well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Cargill, Tyson, JBS, and National Beef. Those are your 4 reasons why American farmers are going broke.
They're known as the Big Four. You might not have ever heard of these companies, but if you've ever bought or eaten beef, you've gotten it from them. The Big Four own 85% of the beef market. One way packers stifle competition is by making contracts with feedlots behind closed doors. Rather than going to auction like Coy does, packers sign alternative marketing agreements, or AMAs, with the feedlots, circumventing the open market that ranchers rely on and depressing that market. 73% of sales now happen through AMAs. And the pressure on feedlots to meet demand means they've consolidated as well. The bigger the feedlots become, the more tightly packed the animals are, which causes pollution in the land and the water. High-density feedlots also account for 7% of emissions that cause global warming in the United States.
I didn't tell him to put that in there.
There really isn't one part of the chain that isn't filling the squeeze. The consumer, the farmer, the animals, even the planet, except, of course, for the packers.
The person sitting at home is paying more, not because the ranchers, the workers are getting fairly compensated for their labor. The person sitting at home is paying more so that we can give more money to the shareholders of those 4 giant companies.
To understand how this happened, Peter says we need to go back to the turn of the 20th century.
So if we just back up for a second, going back to 1906, Upton Sinclair writes his famous novel, The Jungle reveals that these stockyards in Chicago, where there's tens of thousands of cattle penned up and tens of thousands of workers laboring in just horrific conditions. And so there was this consumer outrage.
It's an outrage.
A man isn't safe even at his own dinner table.
Why doesn't the government step in?
And they did step in. At that point, there was a high level of concentration in the beef industry. 5 companies controlled 55% of the share of beef in the United States. And it wasn't just the beef industry that was monopolistic. That was true of the railroads, the steel yards, the coal fields, and the banks.
So President Woodrow Wilson unleashes this probe by the Federal Trade Commission, and 2 years later, Congress passes the Packers and Stockyards Act of 1921.
The Packers and Stockyards Act banned meatpacking corporations from manipulating and controlling prices, creating monopolies, or restraining fair competition, which, by the way, would probably include creating captive markets like the Packers do today with AMAs. For decades, there was bipartisan support for the idea that monopolies were bad. They were bad for the consumer, and they were bad for the worker. That all changed when a new philosophy on the regulation of corporations took hold, driven by economists at the University of Chicago School of Economics like Milton Friedman or Robert Bork, who you might remember from our explainer on Ticketmaster a few months ago. Robert Bork believed consumers benefited from larger conglomerates because their supposed increased productivity would make prices go down. Mergers and price discrimination, Bork argued, shouldn't be as important to the government as consumer welfare, allowing companies to get cheap products to the consumer. His work had a profound impact on President Ronald Reagan, who reshaped our antitrust laws, undoing decades of worker and consumer protection.
We've essentially been marinated in this idea that scale is the way to produce stuff that people can afford, quality products, that's how we get innovation. History tells us otherwise.
The largest packers went from owning just 25% of the market in the 1970s to now owning 85%.
It's a huge bottleneck system. They control all the slaughter and they control all the prices. And you're at their mercy.
Consolidation at this scale means that the market is fragile, and minor upsets can wreck the whole system. Think of early in the pandemic when there was a beef shortage. Slaughterhouses were shutting down because of COVID-19 outbreaks, and ranchers had no one to sell their beef to. Prices were skyrocketing in the supermarket, but ranchers weren't seeing the profits.
The pandemic didn't create this situation, it had revealed this situation.
That year, Coy had financed a herd of Angus beef that he was hoping to make a profit from. His sale was set for March 15, 2020.
Our supply chains in America are the most powerful in the world, and they're all working very hard. They're working round the clock.
And that Friday, the Chicago Board of Trade feeder cattle price tanked to 108. And it hadn't been that low since November of 2010 or 11. I'm still recovering from it.
That was when Coy almost decided to take his life.
When you subject people who are accustomed to being able to support themselves to circumstances in which it's basically impossible to support themselves, there's real trauma associated with that.
Coy runs a weekly group for other ranchers struggling in their business or with their mental health.
There's nothing more that I'd rather do than to take care of cattle. And it's also building a legacy, something that my kids can have in the future and maybe even their kids.
We're ranchers talking about what we're doing, but we're just an analogy to the larger picture of America. It's corporate power dictating what's going on in the halls of Congress, and it is small business in general, not just ranchers. Small business is under attack.
Coy has a side business running a barbecue catering company, and he's transitioning to that full time. He's also devoting time to helping other farmers. He testified before Congress in 2022 over price fixing in the industry.
I come here before you today and try to save what is left of rural America. I do feel very, passionate about this, to be an advocate for the American cattle farmers, because a lot of them are too scared to say anything. I don't have any cattle anymore. I have nothing left to lose.
We don't have to lose farmers like Coy, and we shouldn't. The Biden administration can enforce the Stockyards and Packers Act of 1921, which Coy likes to say the USDA is using as a doorstop now. It would mean ranchers like Coy wouldn't have to give up the work that they love, and the consumer wouldn't be buying hamburgers that only profit shareholders of big conglomerates.
We need to push back on this idea that deregulation and just allowing large companies to do what they will and pursue their own interests amounts to pursuing societal interests. That setup's really good for the shareholder, but we know what happens when shareholders get more money. They put it in their bank accounts, they send it offshore to Cayman Islands bank accounts.
We're in a second era of robber barons, just like Upton Sinclair wrote about at the turn of the century, and we already know the solution: enforcing antitrust laws and increasing competition so that small farmers aren't pushed out.
We want to hear what you think about this story and what other topics you want to see us cover. So sound off in the comments below. And as always...
So that's where I go. I said the power of press is not dead yet, because I'm a testament to that. Look what happened. Ranting on Facebook, it's being heard by the New York Times, to doing this video with the news media outlet of New York City, More Perfect Union. So, I tell everybody, you know, your local papers, anybody in your community, talk to anybody, everybody about what's going on in the beef industry. You know, the consumers don't know what's going on, and they can't fix what's going on if they do not know about it. Thank you.